The school stood like a memory too stubborn to fade. Not grand, not crumbling, just steady, a brick and concrete relic from a time when ceilings were high, hallways echoed with laughter, and chalk dust floated like quiet ghosts beneath fluorescent lights. It had weathered generations. Principals came and went, curriculums changed, but one thing somehow remained unchanged: the man who mopped its floors. 85 years old and still moving before the sun rose, Mr. Otis Langley didn't just clean the school. He breathed life into it. His presence wasn't loud or celebrated. It was quieter than that, something like gravity. He swept with the same rhythm he always had, polished trophy cases no one looked at anymore, tightened screws on loose desks in classrooms he no longer recognized. He wasn't paid well, but he wasn't there for the money. He never had been. Otis had worked at the school for over 6 decades, long enough to see chalkboards replaced by smartboards, textbooks fade into tablets, and children grow up to become parents who sent their own children back through the same doors. But he never left. He never slowed. He wore the same pressed navy blue uniform every morning and whistled the same low, bluesy tune as he worked, more habit than song. His hands were rough, marked with age, and his back carried the memory of years bent in service. But his eyes, those held something different. They sparkled with a quiet knowing, a kind of peace that can only come from a life lived fully, if not always loudly. There were no awards for what he did. No one gave speeches in his honor. Students barely noticed him unless they tracked mud across the hall, but Otis remembered them all, not by their names but by their energy, their fears, their fire, their potential. He could still picture the boy who used to sneak into the gym before school and hit golf balls down the hallway, using a broken yardstick as a club. Otis never stopped him, just watched from a distance, sweeping around the corners, pretending not to notice. There was something different about that kid. Years passed, decades even. Otis never asked where they went. The school itself had changed. The gym was renovated, the lunchroom re-tiled. Security cameras now lined the ceilings where once only cobwebs hung, but Otis remained almost like part of the building. He moved through the halls with the same pace, pushing his cart with its squeaky wheel and nodding politely at teachers he didn't know. He had no wife left, no children. The job was all he had, but he didn't need more. There was purpose in the Polish meaning in the maintenance. To him, the act of cleaning was an act of love. He restored what the world wore down. He gave shine to the overlooked. Every afternoon, when the school emptied, he would sit on the same wooden bench outside the main entrance. It faced the parking lot and the row of oak trees that lined the edge of the schoolyard. There he would rest his knees, sip lukewarm coffee from an old thermos, and watch the wind stir the leaves. No one joined him. No one interrupted. That bench was his ritual, and rituals were sacred. One autumn afternoon, while the sun stretched low across the pavement and the leaves danced in soft spirals, Otis sat longer than usual. His bones ached more now. His breaths came slower. But he stayed, watching the sky fade into the kind of golden orange that only came in October, when the air felt thinner and time moved a little differently. In the distance, a car engine purred, a sound too smooth, too precise to belong to a teacher or parent. It wasn't the kind of car that belonged here, and yet it rolled slowly into the lot, as if drawn by something it couldn't name. Otis didn't move, just watched as the car came to a stop. He didn't know yet that the moment was about to change everything. Inside that car sat a man the world had watched for years, a man who had been both miracle and mess, champion and controversy. Tiger Woods had driven past memories before, but this one had tugged at him in a way few things did anymore. He hadn't planned to stop. He was just passing through, headed somewhere else entirely. But something in the back of his mind, the image of a man with quiet eyes and an ever-present mop, had surfaced unexpectedly. Tiger had once been that kid sneaking down the hallway before sunrise, swinging a yardstick, like it was a 9-iron. He hadn't thought of Otis Langley in years, maybe decades, but suddenly he needed to see him, not out of guilt, not even gratitude, something deeper, something like unfinished truth. Otis remained seated, He didn't flinch as the door opened and a figure stepped out. He didn't rush to his feet, didn't squint or ask questions. He simply looked, and in that look everything paused. The years, the fame, the mistakes, the victories. They all collapsed into a moment so still it might have broken if either of them had spoken, but they didn't, because some reunions don't. Need words. Some truths are too old to be spoken aloud. Some debts are felt, not owed. Otis just nodded as if to say, "I see you. You're still you." And Tiger, for the first time in a long while, felt like a boy again. Not the legend, not the brand. Just a boy who once hit golf balls down a hallway, watched silently by a man who believed in him when no one else did. The bench creaked beneath them, not from movement but from time, wood worn thin by years of weather and waiting. Tiger didn't speak. He simply sat beside the man who had once swept around him like a guardian ghost. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was filled with something heavier, something truer. It was the weight of memory. Tiger's eyes scanned the schoolyard. It looked smaller now. Everything did. The basketball hoops seemed lower, the flagpole less towering, the playground almost toy-like. Time had reduced what once felt infinite into something quaint, manageable. But the feelings it unearthed were anything but small. He remembered the mornings before the sun, before the noise, before the world expected greatness from him. The echo of his steps down the hallway, the slap of rubber soles on polished tile, the thrill of escape, of practicing without eyes on him. Back then, golf had been joy, not pressure. The hallway had been his first fairway. And Otis had been there through all of it, always sweeping, always present, never judging. Tiger hadn't thought much of it back then. As a boy, he hadn't grasped the sacredness of someone simply being there, watching without interfering, allowing space but providing presence. But now, as he sat beside this man, aged by labor and solitude, he understood. Otis had been his first audience, the first person to witness him not as a prodigy, but as a child, full of hope and hunger, a boy trying to find his swing in a world that already expected too much, and Otis had never asked for anything in return. Tiger's success had taken him far, across continents, into the heart of roaring crowds and under the weight of crushing silence. He had held trophies high above his head and sat alone in hospital beds, wondering if he'd ever walk again. He had tasted both adoration and abandonment. But nothing in his story, not the green jackets or the headlines, felt as quietly powerful as sitting now beside the man who had watched it all begin. Otis sipped his coffee slowly, his hands trembling only slightly. Tiger noticed the faded initials etched into the thermos. OL still there, still his. They remained on that bench while the sun moved westward, stretching shadows across the pavement like long, tired arms. Tiger's mind drifted, past the scandals, past the surgeries, past the critics and the comebacks. What lingered wasn't the roar of the Masters crowd or the blinding flashes of cameras. It was the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, the feel of tile under his sneakers, the soft swish of a broom down the hall. He thought of how many people had passed through Otis's life, how many children had walked these halls, barely noticing the man who kept their world running, the man who arrived before anyone else and left only when the floors shone, the man who never asked to be remembered. Tiger wondered how many of those children ever came back, how many ever said thank you, how many even knew his name. And then a sharper thought settled in, a sting wrapped in guilt. What did it mean that this man at 85 was still here, still working, still pushing the same broom down the same hall? Tiger had seen wealth. He had made it, lost it, regained it. But Otis had lived a different kind of wealth. One made not of commas and zeros, but of quiet dignity, of unseen labor, of presence, and yet that didn't mean he should still be working. Not at this age. Not after all he had given. Tiger felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity, something more complex, a blend of awe and responsibility, the kind of emotional knot that forms when one recognizes a debt that was never spoken but always existed. He glanced at Otis again. The old man's eyes were fixed on the trees, watching leaves fall like slow-motion confetti. There was no bitterness in his face, only calm, as if he had long ago made peace with the world, and whatever it did or didn't, give back. But Tiger hadn't made peace, not yet. Not with this. Because what kind of world allowed a man to dedicate his entire life to quiet service, only to keep him laboring through the twilight of his years? What kind of world called people heroes for hitting balls into holes, but ignored the ones who made sure the halls stayed clean and safe for every child who dared to dream? He sat with that thought as the sky shifted to amber, then lavender, then the soft, bruised blue of evening. Lights flickered on in the school behind them. One by one, automatic now. Not like before when Otis had flipped each switch by hand, walking from room to room like a silent steward of learning. Tiger had been many things in his life, champion, icon, cautionary tale. But sitting there next to Otis, he felt like something else entirely. He felt like a student again. And Otis, without ever meaning to, had become his teacher. Not of golf. Not of greatness, but of grace. And that, perhaps, was the greater lesson. The days that followed their encounter on the bench passed slowly, but not without motion. Something in Tiger had shifted. It wasn't loud or showy. It didn't come with a headline or a sponsorship, but it stirred beneath his ribs like the beginning of a long drive, the kind where the swing is measured not by force, but by precision and purpose. He returned to his world of meetings and interviews, of tightly packed calendars and polished routines. But Otis never left his mind, not in the quiet moments before sleep, not in the stillness of early morning jogs, not even in the bright dazzle of televised tournaments. The image of the old man, thermos in hand, boots scuffed with age, eyes full of the kind of wisdom no school could ever teach, remained, like a watermark on his thoughts. Tiger had known men with power, with empires, with fleets of advisors, who managed their every waking hour. But none of them had taught him what Otis did. None had stood beside him in silence and seen him not as a commodity, not as a legend, but simply as a boy who dreamed. And yet, Otis had remained invisible, not because he lacked light, but because the world had never been taught to look in his direction. Tiger decided it was time to change that. Not with fanfare, not with publicity, but with a gesture so quiet, so precise, it would mirror the man, himself. He called in a favor, but not the kind you advertise. No press, no tweets, no tags. He started with the school district, navigating bureaucracy with the same focus he used to study Augusta's greens. Names, numbers, signatures. It was a maze, but he moved through it without hesitation. Then came the accountant, the foundation paperwork. The discreet conversations with people who understood what it meant to honor someone without turning them into a spectacle. He established a trust, simple, elegant, airtight. Enough not just to retire Otis, but to secure every medical bill, every winter coat, every moment of rest the man had put off for the last 6 decades. But it wasn't just about money. That would have been too easy. Tiger wanted to give Otis something more difficult to come by. Time without purpose, time without the need to be useful, time to sit, to breathe, to remember. He wanted to offer the one thing Otis had given. Everyone else his entire life without anyone ever noticing, peace. And then he waited, not for gratitude, not for praise, but for the right moment. It came one late afternoon as the school let out in a burst of backpacks and shrieks. Tiger returned, not in a suit, not in branded gear, just himself. Quiet, low-key. He found Otis once again on that bench. Different day, same thermos. The leaves had thickened now, spring in full bloom, but the rhythm of the scene remained unchanged. Tiger didn't sit this time. He stood for a while watching Otis hum a melody to himself, a song that perhaps only he knew. Then he reached into his pocket and handed him an envelope. Nothing grand, no speech. Just a small weathered envelope with the name Otis written in Tiger's own hand. Otis took it with the same calm he brought to everything, nodded, opened it slowly, as if sensing that whatever was inside might change something permanent. And when he read it, when his eyes moved over the short letter, the simple numbers, the signature that bore the name of the boy he once watched, chase dreams down empty halls, Something in his face softened. Not shock, not joy, something gentler, like a man who had carried weight for so long that he no longer believed in letting it go, and suddenly realized he didn't have to carry it anymore. Tiger didn't stay long. He didn't need to. The gift had never been about being seen giving it. It had been about correcting something silently broken in the balance of things, about honoring the man who had taught him how to stand tall without being loud, how to show up without applause. That night, Tiger drove past the school one last time. Lights off now, the building asleep. And on the bench, a thermos remained. Not forgotten, just resting. Otis didn't return to work the next day, or the one after. The janitor's closet was cleaned out by week's end. The broom leaned against, the wall as if still waiting for him, not knowing it would never be held again. The principal placed a small plaque beside the closet. In honor of Otis Langston, steward of this place and of hearts. Most students didn't understand it. Some teachers cried, but one boy, curious and small, asked who Otis was, and someone told him. They told him not about the floors he cleaned, but the way he stayed long after the lights dimmed, the way he never asked for anything, the way he hummed through sorrow and smiled through struggle, the way he believed in every child, whether they noticed or not. That boy nodded, not fully understanding. But something inside him shifted, and so even in absence, Otis taught. Tiger watched all this unfold quietly from a distance, and for the first time in years, he felt the true depth of victory. Not the kind won on greens and scoreboards, but the kind etched in silence, in humility, in returning what was never requested but always deserved. For the first time in 60 years, Otis Langston awoke without the sound of an alarm clock. No hum of fluorescent lights, no keys clinking from his belt. The air felt different, softer, as though the world had decided not to demand anything from him that day, or the next, or ever again. Retirement had never been something he expected. It was a word other men used, men who wore watches with gold faces and had golf clubs leaning in the corners of their garages. Men who spoke of earned rest and quiet years. But Otis had never expected rest to be earned. He thought of work as a contract between soul and earth. You do what needs doing, not because someone sees it, but because someone must. Still, he didn't resist the change. He didn't try to fill the hours. He let the silence stretch. His mornings now began on the porch of the small house he had lived in for decades, a humble structure, held together by time, paint, and a kind of love that didn't need explanation. The porch swing creaked with the same rhythm it always had, but now it carried a different weight, not of fatigue but of reflection. Neighbors began to notice him more. Not because he had changed, but because he was finally still enough to be seen. They brought him coffee, home-baked pies. They asked about his life, about the years he spent inside the school building that most had passed through without ever noticing the man behind the mop. And he told them. Not in long stories, just little pieces, about the time a student slipped a crumpled thank-you note into his coat pocket and he never found out who. About how he fixed the furnace in the middle of a snowstorm and stayed the night to make sure the pipes didn't freeze. About a boy who used to carry a golf club handle like a sword and practice swings in the hall when no one was looking. A boy he knew was different, not just in talent but in spirit. Tiger's name came up, but rarely. Otis didn't want it to become about fame. He spoke of him the way a gardener might speak of a tree that once needed shielding from wind and now stood taller than all the rest. He didn't tell anyone about the trust fund, or the envelope, or the letter. Not because he was secretive, but because he knew the real story wasn't about the money. It was about being remembered, about being seen, truly seen by someone who once had nothing and now had everything. And, still looked back, with the time now gifted to him, Otis began to write, not for others, for himself. Yellow-lined notebooks stacked beside his chair, filled with thoughts he never had time to put down. Observations, questions, bits of poetry, though he'd never call it that. Sometimes just the weather, or a memory of his mother's. Voice humming through an open kitchen window. He had always been a man of movement, but now in stillness he was blooming. His health, fragile from years of ignoring it, began to improve slowly. Walks replaced night shifts. He learned how to cook for himself with care, not just necessity. A nurse visited once a week, arranged quietly by Tiger's foundation. Under the guise of a city program, she brought books. Otis liked the ones about people who stayed in one place but touched the world. Tiger, for his part, kept his distance. He didn't want to disturb the rhythm Otis had found, but he never stopped watching from afar. Every few months, he'd call someone close to the school, ask how Otis was doing. Sometimes he'd get pictures. Once someone sent him a photo of Otis teaching a neighborhood kid how to fix a lawnmower. The old man smiling wide, sweat on his brow, joy in his bones. It reminded Tiger of something he once heard, that some people water gardens they'll never see bloom. Otis had watered generations, and now, finally, someone was tending to him. One quiet fall afternoon, when the leaves were beginning to turn the color of old embers, Tiger found himself driving past the neighborhood again. He didn't intend to stop, but the swing was empty, and the house was still. His chest tightened. He parked, walked up the familiar steps, and knocked. No answer. The silence wasn't heavy, just unfamiliar. He left a note on the door. Just checking on an old friend, T. The next day a photo appeared in his inbox. Otis, alive and well, had taken a bus to visit his niece in another state. He was holding a plate of barbecue, smiling like someone who had finally allowed joy to take up space in his life. Tiger laughed. Out loud. Alone in his kitchen. It was enough. He folded the photo and placed it in a drawer next to an old glove, a scorecard from his first championship, and a small, worn janitor's key, one he had found long ago in his childhood locker and never thrown away. The key had never opened anything for him. But now it felt like it had opened everything. Years passed. Seasons turned with quiet rhythm and the world moved forward as it always does. Champions rose and fell. Headlines changed. Records were broken and then forgotten. But in one modest town inside a school that most people only remembered in passing, the legacy of a janitor named Otis Langston became something more than memory. It became foundation. After Otis passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 91, the easy town did not mourn with fanfare or speeches. There were no television cameras, no viral posts, just a small gathering of people whose lives had quietly been shaped by his hands, his presence, his silent acts of devotion. The school, now rebuilt and renamed, bore a small plaque by the entrance. In D. Honor of Otis Langston. He cleaned these halls, but he polished lives. No student passed through those doors without seeing his name, and those who asked about him were told stories, not of a janitor, but of a guardian, a man who walked without praise, who bent without complaint, who worked when no one else saw. The need. Tiger Woods attended the funeral. He sat quietly in the back, dressed in a plain black suit, head bowed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. A few recognized him. Fewer approached. And even fewer understood the full depth of what he owed to the man they were honoring. Later that week, he visited the school one last time. The halls were different, brighter, newer, shinier. But the scent of fresh wax on the floor, the echo, of distant laughter, the quiet hum of learning, it was all still there. Tiger walked through those corridors with the reverence of a man returning to holy ground. He reached the janitor's closet, still in the same spot. He opened it slowly. Inside, the tools were gone. The room had been cleaned out. But on one shelf sat a single object, a folded notebook worn at the edges, with the name Otis written in pencil on the front. Tiger opened it. Inside were pages and pages of thoughts, musings and reflections, notes on kindness, on resilience, on children who had forgotten how to smile and eventually remembered, on the importance of sweeping corners where no one walks, because sometimes that's where dust hides longest. One entry read, "I don't need the world to know my name. I just hope the ones who passed me by one day stopped to wonder if someone cared. And I hope they feel the answer in how clean the world felt after I walked through it." Tiger closed the notebook, eyes misted. He knew what he had to do. Months later, he launched the Langston Foundation, An initiative not just for school funding, but for the recognition of unsung heroes, janitors, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, aides, those whose fingerprints linger, not on paper but on hearts. Grants, scholarships and awards began to bear Otis's name, ensuring that across the country no quiet servant would go unseen again, and in that act, Tiger did more than repay a debt. He carried forward a legacy that could not be measured by trophies or headlines, because greatness, he had come to understand, wasn't just about how far you drive the ball. Sometimes it was about how quietly you carry others without them ever knowing. The world would never fully know Otis Langston. But in every freshly mopped hallway, every warm lunch tray handed to a child, every kind smile from someone who thinks no one is watching, he would remain. Unseen, perhaps, but never unfelt. And for Tiger, who had climbed the tallest mountains, that one truth became the most grounding of all, that he had not become who he was in spite of the janitor, but because of him. As he stood once more outside the school, watching the light fall across the plaque bearing Otis's name, he felt no sadness, only gratitude, because the man who had once swept the halls had left behind something no broom ever could, a life so quietly powerful it echoed in eternity.